Section 30 of the American Egypt. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The American Egypt by Channing Arnold and Frederick J. Tabor Frost. Section 30. Yucatan as it is today and the Yucatecans. Part 1. The Yucatecans are a race of parvenus. They have been unfortunate both by inheritance and fate. The Spanish have never been successful colonizers. History teaches that they have always suffered from wind in the head, both socially and religiously. They are bigots, and they are naturally bullies. To these racial failings fate has added for the Yucatecans the last and most fatal of gifts, sudden wealth. There is no doubt about the wealth of the Yucatecans. Many of them are rich beyond the dreams of even their avarice, and that is saying much. But when to mushroom millionaires is given the governance of an enslaved race, it would be nothing short of a miracle if the very finest and largest breed of parvenus was not produced. If you think of all the bad qualities, the pettiness and meannesses of all the parvenus you have ever met or heard of, you will have some sort of mental picture of a Yucatecan. If there are any unpleasant characteristics of the parvenu you have forgotten, the typical Yucatecan has got those too. Avarice is their besetting sin. Money is their god. There is a saying that Jews cannot live in Yucatan. The sharpest Hebrew would come off second best in a business deal with the Yucatecan. This is the characteristic of all ages and all ranks. The Yucatecan is always on the make. It matters not if he is a multi-millionaire. The richest man in the city of Merida would not be in the least offended if you offered to buy the flowers from his patio or garden. He himself would cut what you wanted and drive a hard bargain with you. In a rich quarter of the capital, a wealthy family make a practice every dry season of selling water at 10 centavos a pail. A foreign resident, accustomed to buy eggs from the servants of one of the great land-owning families of Merida, called one day and found the housekeeper out. The little daughter of the house, 10 years old, and entitled, on coming of age, to $1,000,000 in her own right, overheard the caller speaking to one of the maids, and came out to offer for 6 centavos one egg which her pet hen had laid. 3 centavos is the price of an egg all the year through in Yucatan. There are no poor Yucatecans. Small wonder, for not only do they lose no opportunity of raking in the shekels, but they openly boast that they never entertain or show hospitality unless it pays them to do so. We can bear eloquent witness to this, for from end to end of our tour never once was so much as a cup of coffee offered us by a Yucatecan, with the single exception of the semi-official breakfast we earlier described. At the town of Tizimin, where we spent Christmas, though the Jefe and all the authorities of the town knew we were inhabiting a hovel destitute of everything except pegs in the walls on which to swing our hammocks, not a soul in that town of several hundreds of well-to-do people was found to come forward with the offer of a chair or a table, a basin to wash in, or the loan of a little kitchen crockery. No, if we needed such things we must buy them, and if we did not wish to do that, why then we must go without. We had gone to Yucatan intent on roughing it, and we did not mind dining with one of our baggage boxes for table, squatting Turk fashion on the stone floor. We only mention it as typical of Yucatecan inhospitality, which really passes all understanding. But rich as the richest Yucatecans are, It is curious to see how little they know how to spend their money. A dozen shoddy rocking chairs, a roll-top desk, a few Oriental rugs or mats, some painfully modern china, and the walls adorned with a half dozen hideous oleographs. There you have the typical room of the typical rich Yucatecan. They feel this lack of intelligence in using their enormous wealth, and it leads them into all kinds of bizarre extravagances. They can spend money when they like and when it adds, or they think it adds, to their comfort. One Henequen lord went a few years ago to the St. Louis Exhibition. He hired a special steamship and, on reaching New Orleans, ordered a special train, making the condition that it was to travel never quicker than 15 miles an hour, and must stop at sunset, no matter how inconvenient this proved to the railway officials. This precious train cost him £600, and his whole trip of 30 days cost $60,000 or £6,000. As a people, the Yucatecans are illiterate to a degree which is almost inconceivable. With wealth untold, they care nothing for books or learning. A man worth 3 millions sterling confessed to us that there was not a book in his house, and that he never read a paper. And he was certainly one of the most intelligent men in the country, and a man, too, who had travelled extensively in Europe. But if the men are supremely ignorant of everything except money making, and uninterested in aught but the gross sensuality which is the be all and the end all of their worthless lives, the women are worse. It is really not their fault, for they are little better, if at all, than odalisques, leading in youth the lives of toys, in age spending their days in overeating and oversleeping. Of their colossal ignorance of facts within the knowledge of every national school child, the following is an amusing example. A young Yucatecan lady, daughter of one of the richest of the families in the state, was sent to New York for a trip for her health, and she was to go on to England. She suffered so much from seasickness on the voyage out that the doctors in America said that she must not undertake the longer voyage to England, but must return at once to Yucatan. Her married sister in Merida, talking of her return, said she would come back by land. The family are so enormously rich that it was quite possible for them to contemplate the great cost of the overland trip, but it was pointed out to the señora that the invalid would have many weeks of travel, and would have to make a very wide detour south to avoid the swamps of Chiapas. "Oh no," sweetly replied the millionairess, "she is to come by diligence via Havana." The illiteracy of the wealthier classes is reproduced in a grosser form among the ordinary Yucatecans. They have no thoughts beyond their food, their women, and their drinks. But there is much to be said for the dolce far niente view of life, and one could easily forgive this race of sybarites if they were otherwise agreeable. Really, it sounds like an exaggeration, but the Yucatecans seemed to us the most disagreeable folk in the world. They are avaricious to the degree of dishonesty. They will not actually steal, but they will cheat you every time and chortle over it. Quite a big man, a Jefe, who also kept a shop in one town we visited, again and again tried to cheat us out of odd centavos over some trifling purchase. It was incredible, but it was deliberate. They are entirely untrustworthy in business. They will give their word and break it without scruple if it suits their interests. A practical example of this came to our notice in the islands, where there is a good deal of trade with American ports such as Key West. An American skipper told us that he had, at the moment of speaking, no less than 160 pairs of women's shoes on his hands, through the impertinent shuffling of his customers. They would ask him to bring them shoes from the States, give the number, and then if the shoes did not quite look what they thought they wanted, they said, "No quiero," I do not want, and the poor trader, having paid cash for the foot gear, was landed. No Yucatecan will pay a debt unless you dun him ad nauseam. It is always mañana, tomorrow, and, as the stranger in Yucatan learns to know only too well, mañana never comes. If a Yucatecan owes you $5, he will pay you $3. For themselves they are the most remorseless dunners. If you have the misfortune to owe a few dollars for, say, the hire of a volan, you will have the wretch literally before dawn at your door, beating at it and demanding the money, though he well knows you are stopping some days. It is not so much the demanding of the money, which is, after all, their right, as it is the grossly uncivil way they do it. We found this to be the experience of foreigners resident in the country, so we were forced to acquit ourselves of having any especially dishonest look. An American told us that owing a trifling sum to a wealthy woman, the latter came to the hotel and demanded the money with an insolence which was almost intolerable. Our friend the American skipper, who had traded with the islands for more than 10 years, told us that the insolence of the people in matters of trade was extreme. Knowing him to have boots or shirts to sell, they would call from their doors, "Capitan, yo quiero," I want, whatever it was. "Damn 'em," said the little man, "let 'em come up to my store and choose. No, they want me to fag things to their doors, literally put the boots on their feet." Another peculiarity of the people is that they do not recognize a difference of goods. They think the cheapest shoe or cloth should be the standard for all goods. The Yucatecan women are, there is no denying it, very often extremely lovely. It is just that beauty which one instinctively associates with the people who have brought sexual relations to a fine art of absolute self-indulgence. By one of the only 3 Englishmen in the country, we were told that the state of morality among the Yucatecans themselves, quite apart from the very sad side of the slavery question to which we have referred in the last chapter, beggars description. We can well believe it. Marriages are contracted at very early ages, sometimes the bride's and groom's years totaling a good deal under 30. Among the wealthier Yucatecans, marriages are nearly always de convenance, and are arranged by the 2 families, the boy seldom, the girl never, having a say in the matter. Thereafter the child wife passes into a quasi-seraglio type of life. There are never any men visitors to the house, and such things as wholesome exercise are rigorously taboo to all upper class Yucatecan matrons. If the doctor orders exercise, the miserable little animated toy of the Yucatecan Croesus drives some miles out of the city and then stops her carriage and solemnly walks up and down the dusty roadway for the allotted time. No Yucatecan woman of position must ever walk in public. That would be a social faux pas far more serious than to have a child before marriage. The exalted women of Merida very rarely leave their homes till dark when they drive round the plaza. Occasionally they go shopping, when they remain in their carriages, and the goods are brought out to them by obsequious shopmen. The life they lead is of the most empty and vapid nature. Surrounded by dozens of Indian servants, they loll all the day in their hammocks, listening to such gossip as their women friends or their servants can tell them. A curious result of this harem life they lead is the roaring trade done by Turkish peddlers who travel all over Yucatan. Hours are spent by the rich women examining their rolls of cloths and finery. Once a year the Paris milliners and modistes visit Merida and take the orders of the richer wives. The women accept their lot in life very philosophically. It cannot be said of them, as Canning said of the Dutch traders, and as might only too truly be said of many English and American women, that in matters of commerce the fault of the Dutch is giving too little and asking too much. They ask very little but the amorous attentions of their lords and masters, as long as their looks last. When they see themselves replaced with really complete apathy in those special functions. Not that even in their bridal years they have not already been well broken in by a running fire of infidelities on the part of their men folk, but they have long been used to that, when as children they have seen the fate of their little Indian girl playmates. Of the Yucatecan woman one might say only too truly, quoting the reported saying of the Empress Eugénie when her rather erratic emperor brought up to introduce a countess who was notorious as a royal mistress and who on this particular evening appeared as Queen of Hearts, with a large gold heart swinging some way below her corsage: "Madame, vous portez votre cœur très bas." She does, but she really is not to blame. She has been taught nothing better. The suffragette question has not yet invaded Yucatan, and lovely woman is content with the life of a lapdog. As well ask the Dudus and Hades of a Turkish pasha's harem to rebel as these charming señoras, swinging in their hammocks and puffing at their cigarettes. As for housekeeping, they are contemptible in their uselessness. An American lady very kindly volunteered one day to show a Yucatecan lady how to make a cake to which she had taken a great fancy. While our friend was busy mixing the ingredients, she quite naturally said, "While I'm doing this, you beat up the eggs." A look of absolute horror came over the woman's face. "Beat up eggs! Oh, I could not possibly do that. One of my Indian girls can do that for you." But as we have said, they fill the rôle of pretty toys to perfection, and they later prove excellent mothers. They are great breeders, these Yucatecans, and family life is of the closest, the big mansions of Merida often housing 4 generations. Curiously enough, despite the tropical climate, the Yucatecan woman retains her looks quite late into life very often. Our hostess at the breakfast was the mother of 7 children, the eldest a girl of 11, as tall as herself, and yet she certainly did not look more than 22 or 3, and so girlish that it was difficult to believe she was a mother at all. But a far more remarkable case was that of a woman who was but 46 and had 24 sons. We did not see this latter-day Hecuba, but we were told that she was still quite comely. There is very little rebellion among Yucatecan women at their fate, and we certainly heard nothing at all of divorce. We do not think it exists as an institution, though it is possible that in this, as in all else, the men have their own way and, if they want to, can get rid of their wives. Among the less wealthy families, the marriages are less formal in their makings, and the wives do more work. That is really the only difference. Remarriage among the men is the rule. Most of the elder men appear to have been married at least 3 times, which rather suggests that the average life for males is longer than for females. This is possibly so. The Yucatecans certainly look a healthy people. though the superfluous fat which is noticeable even in the boys and girls scarcely suggests real constitutional strength. What surprised us greatly was the terrible prevalence of leprosy among the richest classes. It is not an exaggeration to say that you could scarcely find a wealthy family without this ghastly taint, and some of the greatest landowners and their children are eaten up with it. No steps appear to be taken to isolate the cases, and just before our arrival in the country a young leper, enormously rich, had contracted a marriage with a lovely girl, though he was then in a moribund condition. He had died a few months after his wedding, and while we were in Merida the bride died of the loathsome disease. It is said to have been brought from Spain in the earliest days of the Conquest, and it has remained curiously restricted to the richer classes. You see little or nothing of it among the lowlier Yucatecans, and it appears unknown among the Indians, who as a rule are wonderfully free of all skin troubles. The lepers or those threatened with the terrible curse were some of them men of advanced years, and their general health did not appear in any way affected. One old fellow had but just lost two brothers from it, but he himself had so far escaped, though his children certainly looked tainted. Like insanity, it often skips a generation. It was curious to see these sybaritical plutocrats, eager of life's ecstasy's utmost to clutch at the core, living their apolaustic days out, haunted by this terrible shadow. The Church. What can we say about the church in Yucatan? Does the reader remember those spittoons in Merida Cathedral which we mentioned in an earlier chapter? Well, those ugly et ceteras of an ugly habit are a fitting commentary upon the church. It was in 1867 that President Benito Juárez disestablished the church throughout the whole of the Republic of Mexico. The effect has been simply disastrous as far as Yucatan is concerned. Her church is so discreditable that the Pope would be really only consulting the best interests of Catholicism if he abolished the priests altogether. As there is no state provision, the padres must hold their private dripping pans to catch the public grease, and right skilfully they do this. A set of dirty unwashed rogues, men whose faces are enough to hang them, men whom no father would trust with his girl or boy the other side of a glass door. They are most of them carpet-baggers, wastrels from Spain, many expelled for very excellent reasons from their colleges, who come into Yucatan to find a living. Even the amiable Stephens, who looked at everything Yucatecan, except the garrapatas, through rose-tinted glasses, is obliged to confess that their morals were loose. But that was a long time ago. They are much looser now. The last incumbent of Tizimin was drunk every day, and kept 12 Indian girls in the parsonage. Even the Tiziminites rebelled at last, and this clerical Brigham Young had to go. His place had been taken at the time of our arrival by a priest who had, it was said, means of his own, and had come from Spain especially to feed the hungry sheep of the poky little Yucatecan town. He was a little ratty man, with a face suggestive of previous incarnations as a ferret and a money lender, a blood-sucking, lecherous little thief. That is what the man looked, and we have good reason to believe we have done him no great injustice in this description. He was the hero of the corner in candles, to which we referred in the chapter dealing with Tizimin. We had called in at the tienda to buy a candle by the light of which to eat our humble supper, but the storekeeper told us he had not got a candle left. To our astonishment he said that the padre had bought up every candle in the place; that, as it was Fiesta week, all the Indians would buy candles to burn before the images of the Virgin and the saints; and that the wily curer of souls had, in short, made a corner in dips. The shopkeeper jubilantly announced that he himself had made a profit out of the deal of $100, but the priest would make at least $3,000 or £300, enough for him to live on very comfortably for the rest of the year. There is evidently a great deal in candles in Yucatan. The tienda keeper assured us that the padre was a good man, but we had our doubts on this point. This cunning vicegerent of God had a young priest to help him in the duties, to whom he paid the handsome salary of a shilling a day, of course providing him with food and lodging. We saw the lad daily sitting at the window of the rectory, and it would be difficult to imagine a more saturnine, sensual face. The relations of these men to the girls and women are those of privileged lovers. They are in truth licensed libertines, whose benefit of clergy covers a multitude of sins, venial and otherwise. It did not need great acumen to guess at some of these latter. 6 priests were recently deported from Merida on the gravest charges, no prosecution being contemplated because one of the boys was the son of a very prominent official. The priests, who are not allowed to wear clerical attire in the streets, are on the best terms with the haciendados, and do their utmost, by trading on the superstition of the unfortunate Indians, to keep slavery in being. There is no appeal for the hacienda slave from the action of master backed up by a priest. Friendly with the local slave owner, the padre can, and does, seduce what girls he pleases. It is most unlikely that the bishop would hear of it. The priests must look for monetary support from the land owners, so they are cheek by jowl with them all the time. In the train one day we saw a band of young haciendados elaborately mocking the intoning of the mass, while a priest who was with them was holding his sides with delighted laughter. All the Yucatecans will gladly join in a jest at the expense of Mother Church. One night at a show in Merida, where some very questionable cinematograph views were delighting the worthy townfolk and their children, the loudest guffaws and shrieks of joy were evoked by a view of a church in the course of repainting and cleaning. You first saw the worthy padre directing the workmen, then the painter leaves a pot of black paint on the pedestal of a statue of the Virgin. Enter on the scene 2 ladies. They approach the image, reverently cross themselves, and, mistaking the paint for a piscina, dip their fingers in what they think holy water, crossing their foreheads and then their faces. The fun comes in when they catch sight of each other. This mockery simply enchanted the Catholic audience. Talking of piscinas, at the south door of the Tizimin church was one. In it was a chipped enamel bowl, half full of water with a suspicious sediment. We just touched the edge of the cup, and the sediment began to move about on its own. The water was alive with myriads of small worms and maggoty creatures. The man who had faith enough to believe that the touching of his forehead with that stinking compound was a short cut to salvation deserves his faith. There was another of these tadpole basins in the church at Izamal, and judging from reports that reached us, holy water with some body in it seemed quite the fashion in the Yucatecan churches. Agua sagrada indeed. Agua podrida would certainly be a better name. The spittoons in the cathedral at Merida had replicas, we found, in most of the churches, but the palm must surely be awarded to a "Don't spit" notice which we saw on an altar in one church. That the notice was there was no mere accident either, for we saw it in December, and when we returned through the town in the spring it was still there. Evidently that was the permanent position of this offensive decoration. But at least the clergy can plead a very real necessity for the spittoons and such notices. It is not a pleasant subject, but any one who wrote of the Yucatecans without mentioning the absolutely universal habit would be a faulty chronicler. At all times, everywhere, everybody, young and old, of both sexes, expectorate. They have not the excuse of smoking, for the children and young girls are as guilty of this horrible and unhealthy habit as their elders. The prevalence of the practice was so marked that we asked several Yucatecans to explain what seemed both climatically and physically inexplicable. They pleaded guilty to what really amounted to a racial custom, but they could not explain it. While we were being taken round the Museum of Merida, the 11-year-old son of the curator spat the whole time on the floor. One day in the islands a baker boy of about 12 came to our hut to sell us cakes. While we were looking in his basket he spat on the floor by our hammock side. He seemed absolutely amazed when we reproved him for it. Quite a gentlemanly ranchero who walked some miles with us one gloriously sunny day in Cozumel hawked and spat not once or twice but literally every half minute till we wondered how his poor rasp throat stood the strain hour after hour. The queer thing was that the habit was not prevalent among the Indians. It seemed to be essentially a Yucatecan vice. It really amounted to that. But to return to the church. At the risk of appearing prejudiced, we must say that the Catholicism of the country is so decadent that its disgraceful services would be best done without. The drunken priest at Campeche, with an unlighted cigarette in his hand, seated in a chair at the altar, his legs stuck up on the chancel rails, trying to take part in the intoning of mass is not the exception he should be. Good padres there must be, men who would still deserve the high encomiums that Stephens found it possible to write of the Yucatecan clergy of his day. We saw nothing of them. We saw the prostitution of a great ecclesiastical institution which, with all its terribly bloody history, its soul-choking bigotry, has yet numbered among its servants some of the noblest men who have ever lived. We saw Catholicism at its worst, and its worst is very bad indeed. Nobody, not the veriest nonconformist, could surely speak without reverence and admiration of the noble old man who to-day rules over the Church of Rome. He assuredly would be the first to grieve over the decadence of his creed in this far-off corner of the Catholic world, as there can be no doubt he sorrows at the bloody past of a religion which has ever lived and must ever live on the ignorance, invincible in the case of the better educated, of its followers. If graver charges lacked against Catholicism, there would always be the indelible blot on its teachings that they tend inevitably to encourage indifference and callousness, if not actually cruelty, towards the animal world. Everybody who has had the misfortune to visit the market of a French town, such as Dieppe or Havre, or has driven behind a Neapolitan cabman, knows more than he or she wishes of Latin cruelty. It is not really that they desire to inflict pain, for the mere delight of inflicting it, though there are some fiends enough for that. No, their creed and whole upbringing rob them of that lively sympathy with God's creatures which He, but surely not for tyranny, has placed in our power. This Catholic characteristic is very marked in Yucatan. The pleasantest Yucatecan families we met on our wanderings were living happily amid the victims of such cruelty as would keep an Englishman, if he were capable of it, awake at nights. These were the dogs. Every Yucatecan keeps, it is really absolutely euphemistic to use the word, not one or two, but a whole pack of assorted terriers and hunting dogs, but he never bothers to feed them. It is really a heart-breaking sight for a lover of animals to go into one of the huts or ranches and see the poor things. They hang round the doorways, sometimes so thin and weak that they cannot stand up. Some poor half-breed collie will raise its weary head to your knee level and stare piteously up at you, with eyes which are really hollow from starvation. In one ranch we counted a dozen of all sizes and ages, and every one of them was a disgrace to their owner, who, as it happened, was quite a good fellow in other ways. No, he could not see why he should feed the dogs. They went out hunting with him, those at least that were not too weak, and then they got a square meal of peccary guts or other offal. But the man could not see that the gaunt staring-eyed creatures, their ribs almost seeming to be on the point of piercing through their coats, their bellies one sorry flap of fur, were a real disgrace to him and his children. Wherever you go in Yucatan you see these spectres of dogs. They are really nothing else. As a witty fellow traveller put it, they have to lean against a fence to bark, and have to stand a long while to make a shadow. End of Section 30. Recording by Shena Ser, Fresno, California.